to you all. My name is Gordon Feller. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here in California, joined by two other San Francisco Bay Area residents, and I'll introduce them in a moment to you, but let me tell you about our program today. Today's 1-hour session will end promptly in 59 minutes, and we're welcoming your questions and comments throughout the whole course of the hour. The title of this program, organized by the World Smart City Forum, is Internet of Things and Sustainability, Practice, Policy, and Promise. And we're being joined by two experts in the field. And let me first explain a little bit about our format. We will ask them to, after I've introduced them, we'll ask them to explain a little bit about their work and then tell us about the ideas and research that they've developed around the future of smart cities. We are gathered from many different countries right now today, and World Smart City Forum brings together more than 1,000 experts who are working around the world on smart cities, who represent national governments. They represent research institutions that are involved in the development of technical global open standards. They represent companies who are developing smart city solutions, some of them technology companies, and some of them developing services on top of those technologies, as well as non-governmental organizations, universities, and independent research organizations. So we're really pleased to have a very diverse group joining us. We have a Twitter handle where we would encourage you to ask questions if you would like. We also have a group chat function on the Google Hangout page. If you see that, you can ask your question in either format, either through Twitter or through the chat function. And the Twitter handle is World Smart City, and we'll be following your tweets and your comments on both formats. But now let me introduce our two expert presenters who are joining us early in the morning here in California. They're both based at the University of California at Berkeley, on the Berkeley campus, in an institution called CITRIS. That's the Center for Information Technology and Research in the Interest of Society. The deputy director, Camille Crittenden, PhD, who's based there, is also associated with the Banatao Institute, and she's being joined by Brandie, Nonnecke, also a PhD, and she serves as Research and Development Manager at CITRIS and at the Banatao Institute. So we've asked them to comment on some research which has been recently published, very, very recently published and produced with the help of a grant from the Microsoft Corporation. So let me at this point turn the tables to Brandie and to Camille and ask them to take it away and walk us through the research that they've done and the insights that they're ready to share. Thank you both.
Thank you, Gordon. It looks like my colleague, Dr. Camille Crittenden, was accidentally dropped from our Hangout, so she is logging back in right now.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction, Gordon. Again, I'm Dr. Brandie Nonnecke. I'm Research and Development Manager of CITRIS based at UC Berkeley, and I would like to start our presentation, so I will go ahead and screen share. Okay, so hopefully Camille will be able to join us here in a minute because she'll be introducing the first part of our presentation today. Our presentation is called IoT and Sustainability, Practice, Policy, and Promise. And as Gordon mentioned, this is part of a larger research project we did with the same title. We've drafted a white paper which will be made available on the CITRIS website very soon. But we also hosted a public event on May 12th where we discussed these issues with elected leaders, expert technologists, policymakers on these issues. And that is actually videotaped. We videotaped the event, and it will be available on our CITRIS YouTube channel.
Hi there. Sorry, I just was able to join. For some reason, I got kicked off there for just the opening 3 minutes.
Well, we're glad you're back.
Thank you. Apologies.
Great, so I'm glad Camille is back because she's going to take the lead on the first part of our presentation. So I'll hand it over to Camille.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Well, we're delighted to be here with you in the World Smart Cities Forum. Just a short outline about the material that Brandie and I will present in the next half hour or so. We wanted to give you a little bit of background about Citrus and where we're coming from with this research. We want to talk about then the field of IoT for sustainability as this relates to smart cities, and think about particularly some of the urban challenges of implementing IoT for sustainability, and then look at the promising innovations in these three sectors that you'll see. Brandie will talk about energy, water, and transportation. As we're doing that, we'll sorry, Brandie, go back one more.
Sorry.
As we're doing that, we'll look into some of the considerations that we should be thinking about as we're excited about the innovations. There are some cautions that we should be aware of, and these include interoperability, data stewardship, and equitable access. And finally, we'll close with some recommendations based on the research that we've done over the last few months. So just about Citrus and the Banatow Institute, we are a research institute of the University of California. We are on 4 UC campuses. We're based here at UC Berkeley, but we also have strong partnerships at UC Davis, Merced, and Santa Cruz, and each of those contributes in various ways to the IoT for sustainability kinds of research questions. Faculty on those campuses are quite involved. We have some basic funding from the UC Office of the President, but then we work with our faculty members to raise additional funds from outside agencies. These can be federal or state or local public agencies, as well as corporations and private foundations. We also have a startup incubator and are quite enthusiastic about helping faculty and students to translate their ideas from the lab bench into commercialization. So we work with those faculty members or students, if they are founders and entrepreneurs, to help to hone those skills and give them the tools that they need to be able to create new startup companies. And in fact, there are a couple that are related to this field of IoT that we'll mention later on. We work all together with about 80 core faculty members here at Citrus, and I should mention the acronym Citrus actually stands for the Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. So we have those mandates to work with information technology for projects that are going to be of broad social benefit, as you'll see in the next slide when I talk about the research initiatives. So we have our work structured into basically 4 research themes, and you'll see a number of these cross over into the topics that we'll be talking about this morning in IoT for sustainability. So first among those, there's an initiative in sustainable infrastructures. We've had work going on for some time in the fields of IT for energy, including work on building efficiency, on microgrids and energy storage and distribution, all aspects of energy work. Also, as that relates to water and to transportation, we have a number of projects with wireless sensor networks trying to monitor and track the water in the Sierras, for instance, in a project called SierraNet. We work closely with the Institute for Transportation Studies and other faculty members working on transportation research, and also the intersection between energy and transportation, say in electric vehicle charging and electric vehicle use. So there's the Sustainable Infrastructures initiative. Brandie and I work closely on the Connected Communities initiative, and this one really involves trying to create new platforms for people to express their opinions and provide guidance to policymakers and elected officials as to what their priorities are. In this case, it comes into play where we're talking about equitable access, as I mentioned before, to some of the benefits of IoT. So we'll be looking at that, some of the policy issues, some of the data accessibility issues, and privacy and security. A third research initiative is in people and robots. So we have a number of faculty members who are working in robotics, not only in the physical manifestation of robotics and their interaction with people, say in industrial applications, which you might typically think of, but also in applications in artificial intelligence, machine learning, other kinds of human-computer interaction. Finally, we have a research initiative in health, and for this we work closely also with the UC Davis Medical Center. And health, if we're talking about IoT and sustainability, one of the purposes of having IoT in urban environments is to improve the quality of life, improve the wellness and, say, the walkability and alternative transportation that might include improving people's health and improving their sense of wellness. So that initiative also crosses over into some of the topics that we'll be talking about today. So what are some of the urban demands on natural resources? You know, we talk about cities and the framework of smart cities and the increasing urbanization around the world, which we'll talk about as well. Right now, over half of the world's population lives in cities, and this percentage is increasing all the time. So what does that mean for managing cities and managing our natural resources? It can be problematic because a number of the problems are concentrated then in cities. So say here these statistics show that 70% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. There's a huge amount of water that's wasted in cities from faulty pipes. We've seen also the detriment as far as water being unsanitary or unhealthy, say in some of the crises that happened in Flint, Michigan. Also, if we think internationally, it's a drain on resources to be able to provide clean, healthy drinking water to growing populations in all parts of the world. Cities, in fact, use 75% of the world's primary energy. So this is good news and bad news. That this increased urbanization really concentrates some of these challenges in a prescribed geographic area, but it also means that our solutions can be quite focused and have a greater impact as we focus on cities as a real linchpin for our research and implementation of tools that are going to help improve some of these statistics. So as I mentioned, we're looking not only at domestic cities, but also looking at the increased urbanization of cities around the world. And as many of you probably recognize, that this trend toward urbanization is indeed a worldwide phenomenon. So this slide just shows the incidence of so-called Giga Cities, so cities of 10 million members or more, and how they're increasing and where they're increasing. So you'll see in this slide how the list of some of the top cities and how some of them are rising on the list, and a few are dropping, but overall there will be more and more Giga Cities around the world. And in the right-hand side of this slide, and then on the next slide, if you want to move ahead to the next one, it shows the geographic distribution of these Giga Cities as well. So you'll see that many of them are in the warmer parts of the world. So in this area around the equator, in South and Southeast Asia, and Africa, and Latin America, you'll see that because of various demographic reasons, including population movement, that by 2060, 60% approximately of the world's population will be in these tropical climates. So that has great relevance to the work that we're doing in smart cities, trying to manage, say, building efficiency, building energy efficiency in these tropical climates. So we're looking into new materials, looking into new techniques for trying to manage quality of life and sustainability in some of these areas which are growing so warm, even as the climate changes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandie to give a few more specifics about some of the research that we've been doing in these three particular areas.
Thank you, Camille. So as we can see, this is a serious concern. Our cities are growing, and how are we going to enable our cities to become more resilient and sustainable in the face of an influx of population? I think IoT technologies offer cities the capability to collect and synthesize vast amounts of data for the better management of critical infrastructure and resources. I'm going to share a few technologies we've identified within the domains of energy, water, and transportation. IoT has a key role to play in the transition to distributed smart microgrids that could allow cities to utilize local sources of renewable energy instead of coal or diesel-powered remote generators. Here in Berkeley, California, there's a municipal building complex downtown that switched its backup power source from diesel to solar by remotely connecting solar panels on the roof of a downtown parking lot to nearby facilities and buildings. And then another area is smart energy meters. The potential sustainability benefits of smart meters, we believe, is realized from the more detailed consumption data and pricing data provided to consumers. So showing energy costs can help to influence behavior change. And one study by the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford, they demonstrated that customers receiving direct feedback from smart meters reduced their electricity usage by 5% to 15%. And then also within Citrus, as Camille mentioned earlier in our presentation, we have an incubator called the Citrus Foundry. And there's a startup that emerged from within this incubator called WattTime, which you can check out at wattime.org. And they developed an IoT-based technology that allows customers to run appliances that could use electricity on a flexible schedule, such as a washing machine or a dishwasher, when renewable sources are available on the grid. And the technology can also be applied to electrical vehicle charging, prioritizing times when renewable energy is available. And this is a big concern that we've heard within cities, because as you have more and more electric vehicles, this will place a big demand on the grid for energy. So we need to identify ways to distribute that load, and the ability to charge those vehicles using clean energy would be a very smart initiative to take for cities. We also think that devices like WattTime should be incorporated into civic infrastructure, including private residences. So within water, IoT technologies offer great potential for cities to efficiently manage their water pipe systems. They can install remote sensors to monitor flow and prevent leakage. We found a really interesting study about listening to the distinctive sound of leaks. So AT&T, IBM, and Mueller Water use sensors connected to a cellular data network to listen for distinctive sounds of leaks in the city system of underground pipes. And then also, just like within electricity, smart water meters that display real-time usage can help to influence behavior change. I think it's really important that with any initiative that we take, there is always an end-user facing platform that actually shows people what are the impacts of your use of resources. And then another very important area for cities is water reclamation. Camille also mentioned this, as freshwater resources face increasing demand and diminishment from climate change, water reclamation will take on an important role in sustaining cities' water needs. And within transportation, I'm sure all of us have maybe even faced this morning, traffic jams and congestion. So every year, Americans cumulatively spend over 6.9 billion hours in traffic congestion, causing over 3.1 billion gallons of wasted fuel and contributing to nearly 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And so one area that could really help with this is autonomous and connected vehicles. And this could provide unprecedented traffic coordination by enabling vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, which can reduce inefficient braking and accelerating. And this will provide the additional benefit of reducing CO2 emissions. And then also, of course, shared mobility platforms and traveler information technologies like Uber and Lyft can reduce automobile ownership. And platforms like Waze and Google Maps can provide commuters with more information on traffic flow and alternative modes of travel like public transportation. So I think what we're really seeing here is if you provide the information to people, it makes them more informed and they can make decisions, especially more sustainable decisions. So another example is San Francisco's SF Park platform that utilizes sensors, smart parking meters, demand response pricing, and real-time mapping to inform drivers on the availability and cost of parking. The system was able to redistribute parking from congested areas of the city, which reduced traffic congestion and idling, which then reduced CO2 emissions. So you get a double benefit. People don't have to sit in congested parts of the city, and you're reducing CO2 emissions. I think these types of systems are really critical for cities. There's this study by Shoup from 2005 that said in a 15-block area of Los Angeles, drivers were spending an additional 100,000 hours just looking for parking. And this caused them to use an additional 47,000 gallons of fuel and emit 730 tons of CO2 within the span of 1 year. So if we're able to optimize parking and make it more efficient and streamlined, the benefits for the environment will be profound. And the last project I wanted to discuss is the Mobile Millennium Project, which was launched in the Bay Area in 2008. And this is a project out of UC Berkeley. It was one of the first to demonstrate the benefit of combining traditional traffic flow data from fixed traffic infrastructure with crowdsourced traffic data from commuters' smartphones. And this enabled unprecedented insight into real-time traffic flow. I think more and more we're going to see a combination of data from multiple sources, which I think is a great benefit, instead of having this data in silos. So we can bring together data from fixed IoT with mobile IoT, so sensors embedded in vehicles, or even from a commuter's smartphone. Combining this together will provide a much more nuanced view of what's actually happening. So now we're going to talk about some of the concerns of IoT and what cities should be thinking about. And I know there's a lot of talk about interoperability, and I think interoperability is really a double-edged sword. On the one hand, lack of universal or open data standards and interoperability of IoT devices can lead to redundancies, inefficiencies, and data silos. And IoT devices that operate in isolation or are only connected with devices from the same manufacturer limit consumer choice. They can hinder availability of insights and efficiencies from data transfer and utilization across those IoT systems. But full interoperability among devices may be neither feasible nor desirable. So fully interoperable systems may actually be more vulnerable to failure, whether through accidental or malicious acts. And corporate incentives right now may also be misaligned with interoperability. And imposing standards across all devices could actually curb investment in innovation. So I think this is a very, difficult area, but it's an area that we need to be thinking about early, and we need to put a lot of minds on it to really make sure that we set this up in a way that promotes innovation while reducing any inefficiencies. And these questions should be considered at the industry level and the policy level, and I think the city level with engagement from your public in order to enable really systems level innovation and security for city level IoT deployments. Also, of course, standard settings bodies, NIST and ISO. I recommend checking out what they're doing, and if you're a city level leader, really tapping into the resources that they have available and joining that conversation. So I'm now pass it over to Camille to speak about data stewardship.
Thank you, Brandie. So at Citrus, we're also concerned not only with IT innovation, but also taking a look at what the impact on society is. And so one of the areas of concern with regard to IoT is what happens to all of this data? We implement the Internet of Things in order to collect and manage and use to make actionable decisions. A lot of data, as Brandie mentioned, both from fixed devices, whether it's in the streets or in your light bulb, or from the mobile devices that we carry in our pockets on our smartphones. So along with the enormous benefits that come from gathering all of that data, also comes some cautions for questions of privacy and security. At Citrus, we have held a number of conferences and convenings regarding data, including one last year called Who Owns the Data, thinking about not only these issues of privacy, but also of financial benefit. So if there are big corporations that are gathering and managing all this data, but it ultimately derives from individual citizens, are the citizens also then gaining benefit from the data that they're providing? So these are also big questions that should be considered when we're thinking about implementing these IoT systems. So a few of the recommendations that we might have would be around the collection of data and the storage of data. So we would recommend implementing privacy safeguards to the extent possible as far as anonymizing data, and to consider retention policies that would decrease the amount of data that's actually stored. That would cut down on the vulnerability of some of that data to hackers or other kind of malicious attacks, whether those are for personal exploitation, so someone wanting to know about one's personal travel habits or other kind of building occupancy habits, or whether that's more on a system-wide kind of basis, say wanting to exploit an energy grid or a water system by hacking into some of the IT systems that are managing those infrastructure systems. So as Brandie mentioned, NIST is also a team has a team that's working on these questions as well, and there are a number of think tanks and university-based research centers like ours that are considering these as well. And I think that robust conversation between academic researchers and the policymakers and corporate actors is really important in order to safeguard all of our best interests. So moving on to the next slide, I mentioned before this issue of equitable access. So a lot of the infrastructure that we're talking about serves the public and is publicly funded infrastructure. So we want to be sure that it's also returning a level of benefit to the public that's commensurate with what the public is putting in. So this idea of equitable access really plays out on at least two levels. One is in the infrastructure, and as you see here, we're considering the infrastructure not just in the electric lines and the water pipes and highways, but really to think about the internet backbone that is tying all of this together as well. So if we talk about the Internet of Things, we're talking about not just the things, but also the internet. So we need to make sure that this access to broadband internet is also being equitably distributed. So as you'll see on the map in the slide here, that's not necessarily the case. Often the high-speed broadband is well overlaid with areas of higher income, which is not surprising, but is something that requires some reflection and possibly some kind of governmental oversight or regulation just to make sure that the benefits and opportunities that are afforded by internet access are equitably distributed across income levels and from urban to rural spaces as well. If you go to the next slide, we're thinking about equitable access not just at the infrastructure level, but also at the personal level. So not everyone in the world has access to smartphones. And there have been cases, in fact, where some well-meaning platforms that were trying to, say, understand where roads needed to be repaired. There was an app, I think, in the Boston area called Street Bump, where you could link your smartphone device to this platform that would then automatically send updates to the city or the regional agency responsible for maintaining the roads to be able to automatically report where roads needed to be repaired, where there were potholes or other things that needed attention. Well, this may well overlap with the places where people who are driving in single occupancy cars, instead of areas say, public transportation, or in areas where people perhaps did not have smartphones. So it wasn't an accurate reflection of where the physical infrastructure needed attention, but was more a reflection of socioeconomic capacity. So questions like that need to be considered as we're thinking about implementing these IoT technologies. So turning it now back over to Brandie to talk about some of the recommendations coming out of our research.
Okay, thanks, Camille. So we've put together this graphic to illustrate our recommendations, and we focus our recommendations with civic engagement and collaboration across stakeholder groups, including citizens, the private sector, and the public sector, at the core of all IoT deployment efforts within energy, water, and transportation. We believe that the success of smart city initiatives depends not only on smart technology, but on tapping the ingenuity of people who have firsthand experience. And Camille will discuss in a minute about the benefits of public-private academic partnerships. And we also encourage enabling connections between systems and consumer-level IoT deployments, and fostering collaboration and data sharing across sectors. Of course, when possible, I think IoT technologies and data, to the extent possible, while maintaining, of course, privacy and security, should be shared across these sectors. This will lead to greater efficiencies and insights. Sustainability issues and their solutions, I don't think, they do not operate in isolation. Instead, sustainability and efficiencies in energy, water, and transportation are actually interrelated, and their resolution will only be found if silos are removed and collaboration is able to flourish. So we recommend cities collaborate with their constituents and with the private sector and the academic realm when drafting their strategic plans to utilize IoT technology for sustainability objectives. And we also encourage cities to ensure that they consider and incorporate plans for ensuring privacy and security of IoT systems. There's a lot of work currently happening within the area of looking at different types of IoT technologies and providing a framework of what are the potential security risks, how do we communicate these with the public, and how do we set up a system that can ensure security to the greatest ability. So Camille will continue with our additional recommendations.
Great. So many partners come into play here when we're talking about such complicated systems, and we, as Brandie said earlier, really need all good minds to focus on the range of opportunities and challenges that we face in thinking about IoT for sustainability. So coming from a research environment at a research institution, we really encourage those public institutions as well as private actors like corporations and startup companies to really consider the full range of actors who might be able to bring solutions to bear on this issue. So we have found in conversations that often there are bimodal conversations happening where there might be a public-private partnership, but we really want to encourage bringing the academic partners into this as well, because a lot of research innovation and analysis and evaluation can happen from academic partnerships. When I spoke about data sharing and data access before, we really want to think about this question of interoperability and making sure that the data is being considered carefully for the privacy risks that it might pose, as well as the opportunities for analyzing the vast streams of data that we're gaining from these IoT implementations. So thinking about equitable development of the broadband infrastructure and access is going to be very important. And finally, as you'll recall in Brandie's symbol on the previous slide, we have citizens at the center, and we really want to make sure that whatever technology is being implemented, that it's going to have a good effect on the citizens and residents of these urban areas. In order for them to actually change some of their behavior, say using less electricity or being more aware of when they might have leaks within their personal home systems of water irrigation, that we need to also be developing some of the technology in collaboration with communications professionals and others who have good outreach to the community. Those might be advocacy groups or other kinds of community groups organized around sustainability issues. So finally, I just want to close and say thank you to Gordon and to the World Smart Cities Forum for hosting us here, and to the sponsors of our research on this topic, those being Microsoft and, of course, Citrus here at University of California.
Well, thanks so much for bringing us this. It's really substantive and a lot of material for us to go through. The first question I'll pose to both of you comes from one of our participants in Bangalore in India, in the state of Karnataka. And the question is about best approach to helping Indian cities that are hyper-crowded to become smart cities. This is really, this questioner has in mind the problem of population density, and maybe that's an opportunity and not a problem. But looking at what you've said from the standpoint of emerging economies and fast-growing cities like Bangalore itself, are there some things that you can say that your research helped point to that are relevant both for a city like San Francisco and a city like Bangalore?
Sure. I'll start, and Brandie, you can follow up. We have looked at cities in South Asia, and we have a strong collaboration with some research partners in Singapore, actually, that are focused on energy-efficient buildings for tropical climates. So looking at very population-dense environments, like in Bangalore, which is distinct from other areas that are perhaps in more developed economies. But I would say to work with the public agencies would be really important to make sure that some of the policies and regulations that are governing, say, new buildings or the transportation infrastructure, that the policymakers have these kind of goals in mind, and that they also have access to the best practices and learnings from other parts of the world and other parts of the region, which might be most applicable.
Yeah, I also think it's important, as we've discussed in our presentation, to consult with communities on how they will use these technologies. And I think that early and frequent consultation with our constituents is really important, because this will inform actually how they deploy and develop the technology. And Camille mentioned a very important topic about influencing behavior change. So we can implement all of the IoT technologies in the world, we can make our communities more informed, but if that information doesn't result in a change of behavior, then we won't see the sustainability gains achieved. So I think it's important to have these public campaigns and provide information and data in a very understandable way to communities to help inform their behavior change.
I'm thinking out loud now about books like Nudge and UDGE, which help to clarify some of the research in behavioral economics and how behavior change can be facilitated. Do you have an example, maybe somewhere like the San Francisco Bay Area, where you've seen a behavior change focused initiative that produced some measurable results that maybe accelerated the transition to smart and sustainable cities? Is there a good example where that kind of behavior incentive worked well?
Actually, I have one example. I think that the system that I showed it in the slides, there was an image of a smart meter for energy in the home, and it actually showed how much energy you were using and the cost of that energy. So I think actually if we can tie sustainability objectives with some financial incentives, that can help push behavior change. So by showing people this is the amount of energy you're actually consuming and this is how much it costs, that can actually help to shift that behavior. Also, I think that when we tie together sustainability objectives with greater efficiency, so if you think about transportation and the SF Park system, the direct benefit to the consumers, the users of that technology, was streamlining parking, which we want to be able to get to a parking spot really quick. We're going in to see a show in San Francisco. We don't want to drive around in circles for 30, 45 minutes looking for a parking spot. So right away, people were adopting that technology to be able to find parking. But the added benefit was that it was actually reducing CO2 emissions in the city because it was streamlining parking. People knew exactly where to go instead of circling around. So if we can build in, I think, dual incentives to show people there are these additional benefits or creating efficiencies, but also there are these environmental benefits, I think that the double benefit will really help to influence behavior change.
Well, speaking of the double benefit, I guess we also should talk about the two-track approach. Is policy innovation needs to be tracking well and tracking in parallel to the technology innovation. And so SF Park is a good example, I think, where you have parallel innovation. You have the policymakers in the San Francisco Metropolitan Transportation Agency who implemented SF Park, adopting policies that enable different types of pricing at those meters based on time of day and demand. And the dynamic pricing sent a signal that changed the behavior of the person who was parking to choose closer to the downtown and more congestion, or farther away from the downtown, less costly, less congestion. And so I guess my question to you both is, as you look at this dynamic interplay between the policy, the public policy, the government policy innovation at the city or the regional level, and then the technology innovation at the private sector level where those technologies are being developed and deployed, are we in balance between the two? Is there an imbalance where the policy is not yet caught up with the technology? What's your judgment about where we are in this two-track approach?
Actually, I think SF Park is a really good example of a strong partnership between the public and private sector entities. And I think in order for public policy and the technology to be aligned, they need to be collaborating early, which they were doing in the SF Park project. I think if we have policy in isolation, policy initiatives without consultation with technologists, that's a road of trouble, and vice versa. So I think really this collaboration and partnership between our city level officials who are implementing policy, even regional and national, at the federal level, there needs to be this collaboration with technologists.
Well, go ahead, Camille, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add that I like that example of the demand pricing for nudging people perhaps to make different decisions about when they might be traveling. I think some other incentives for participating in programs like this can be competition among communities. So there are some programs like Cool California that are challenges for different communities to reduce their level of energy usage. So I would encourage folks to check out that program as well. There are a number of projects throughout the University of California system too. President Janet Napolitano has sent a strong message that energy and sustainability are concerns of hers that she wants the university to take a lead on coming up with solutions to. So for instance, there was an event a few weeks ago called the Carbon Slam that invited graduate students and faculty members to present their ideas about reducing carbon emissions and improving energy efficiency throughout the state. So there can be these sort of local or regional competitions that also can create incentives for people to adopt different behaviors.
And in that regard, I guess the questions just come up. Do we have a good case study of effective community management around smart city projects that we can learn from? And you're talking about, SFMTA's initiative around SF Park. You're talking about engaging the student population at the university. I know Brandie's just come back from Austin, Texas, where she heard about a lot of interesting examples that perhaps involved some community engagement and citizen engagement. Are there any other examples that people should look up and use their search engine to identify that maybe you could highlight or list for us quickly that would be other places where we could go beyond the Bay Area? Maybe Brandie, you first. Any others that come to mind?
Yeah, actually in our white paper we mention a new initiative. Camille, I'd love if you can help me remember the name of this initiative, where they're electing city block leaders that help influence behavior change around, I think it's energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is the Cool City Challenge.
Yeah, that's it.
Is it? Okay. So I think that is definitely one.
That's good.
We don't
That's a good
have
one.
any other international examples.
Camille, anything that comes top of mind for you?
Well, maybe it's just the listservs that I belong to, but it seems like I see good projects coming across my screen and every day that cities are trying to implement. So Brandie referred to the white paper that we drafted. Perhaps we can include a link to that with the webcast here that will have some resources there that we used in our research. In the San Francisco Bay Area, there's also a listserv, sf.city, C-I-T-I, that frequently has good examples of projects actually throughout the country of IoT in particular, and frequently with sustainability gains.
Well, one question comes up about another city, in this case Singapore. The next time many of us here today will be meeting up is face-to-face in Singapore on July 13th for the World Smart City Forum. We'll have about 350 participants, at least that's the current number that are registered. Would either of you be able to identify any specific examples of smart city projects in Singapore that we should be looking at before we visit, or maybe even during our visit?
Well, Singapore has been a really great leader, in part because it is economically fairly advanced and because its population is so dense. They've been able to invest in doing some research on sustainability for tropical regions and energy efficiency. So as I mentioned, UC Berkeley has a program there that's looking into materials for smart buildings and also IT for managing smart buildings, so being able to use sensors to detect occupancy, for example, or to manage lighting to create efficiency gains. That being said, the government of Singapore has been quite supportive, and I would say that looking at the housing development agency there, something like 85 or 90% of the housing in Singapore is actually provided by the government. So in that case, you have a near monopoly on building in Singapore, which means that they can implement some of these advances in ways where other parts of the world where the construction and housing infrastructure is more distributed among different players might not be able to have such a consistent implementation. But I would encourage people to look at the Housing Development Authority as perhaps somewhere to go to look for innovations. Singapore has also been really great in involving the community, and they have a digital agency as well. I forget the acronym exactly, but they also have been using digital tools to reach out to their citizens to be able to gain feedback about their behaviors and priorities.
Anything, Brandie, that you would want to add before we turn to the next question?
No, not for Singapore.
All right. So one other question has come up about the potable water crisis in cities in the emerging economies. And you talked a little bit about the experiment that Mueller and IBM undertook. Can you say more about what those types of projects represent in the way of the longer-term possibility? Have you looked more at water in some way that you could fill in some of the blanks for us?
Well, actually, I think that for developing countries, so I'm a telecom policy scholar, and in a lot of ways, you know, this actually applies to water. So within developing countries, they have a late mover advantage. They may not have the infrastructure in place, and so if they are able to reach a point where they can build out that infrastructure, they can build it in with the technology and the sensor networks that we wish we could implement within our aging infrastructure now. So with saying that, I think for developing countries, in their cities, they could start to deploy some sensor-based networks that can provide more information on leaks. But also, I think one big issue is, of course, within rural areas of developing countries, and they have a borehole, a water well, there are maybe high levels of arsenic. So being able to test the water right at the source and then actually use some technology to remove the arsenic would be very beneficial for the cities and rural areas.
Good. Camille, anything on your side?
I think the water management and sanitation, those are areas that are really ripe for innovation. And a lot is happening here throughout the UC system and at Citrus to be able to, as Brandie mentioned, use some sensor networks to understand where there are leaks, to get a better sense of being able to forecast where water will be and how much water there will be, to be able to anticipate droughts and plan for better water distribution in that case. To be able to safeguard safe water, clean drinking water is very important, and we have some startups here in the Citrus Foundry who are working on that issue as well, both in the arsenic remediation, as Brandie mentioned, as well as using innovative biotechnology to be able to detect unsafe drinking water. So I would say just keep an eye out. This is an area where I think the academic partnerships could be really fruitful, because we have folks in the labs here who are working on some of these issues and applying the latest technology and the most innovative thinking to these exact problems.
Well, you raised the question of risk, so let me ask the question that was presented to us about that topic. Do we have examples of major data breaches that either interrupted the deployment and success of a smart solution for cities, or maybe resulted in a smart solution being implemented because the data breach essentially identified a weakness that, once that weakness was identified, there were initiatives to fill the gap? So the question broadly is about cybersecurity, which will be one of the 4 major themes of our World Smart City Forum event in Singapore, which I should say to everybody is going to be live webcast, so everybody's encouraged to participate, not just those who join us in Singapore. So maybe, Camille, you first on the cyber challenges.
Sure. I think cybersecurity is very important, especially as we're thinking about the broader landscape of Internet of Things, and I'm glad that, again, there are folks both in the private sector and in academia who are really thinking hard about cybersecurity. I would point in the case of IoT to one interesting project that you could probably find the video for on YouTube or elsewhere, where people have hacked into the autonomous vehicles and were able to either turn them off or to actually steer them away from the road in ways that were somewhat frightening if you think about proliferation of autonomous vehicles. So I'm sure that the companies that are thinking about this are also, well aware of these challenges and vulnerabilities, but that's one place where the more we look into autonomous driving, the more careful and deliberate we're going to have to be about this question of cybersecurity. If you look at some of the reports from the energy sector as well, I know that a few studies have been done about the vulnerability of the energy sector and the grid. At this point, I think that they are still more concerned in general about things like squirrels and other things that you might not anticipate in causing energy outages. But I think that the more that we rely on these internet networks to monitor and provide a level of security for the energy supply, the more concerned we'll have to be with making sure that they are strongly protected against attacks.
I think also that we should really commend white hat hackers for actually hacking into these systems. So Camille mentioned autonomous vehicle, which was the example I was going to give. There's an example you can YouTube and look this up about some hackers hacking into a Jeep and then controlling the steering on the interstate. And they're all doing this to their friend. But this could cause a lot of damage. And also, you've seen hacking into smart baby monitors. I think also, though, these are serious concerns that we need to address, and we need to listen to the white hat hackers and innovate around. But I also don't want fear to have an over influence on the development and rollout of IoT. That's why Camille and I keep mentioning that we need to really engage with the constituents and the citizens of a community early and frequently, to be able to discuss some of these vulnerabilities and be able to provide more information to people so that they don't become automatically turned off by the idea of IoT. Because the worst case scenario, if people don't want IoT deployed within their city, then we can't use IoT for these really great sustainability gains. And so I think we just need more of a dialogue around what some of these issues are, communication between the public, private, and academic sectors to inform how we build these technologies to make them secure, and that we're not overly afraid of things.
My big takeaway is that if we just extract people from the equation and squirrels, that will probably be more effective in ensuring security for our systems. So in that regard, I guess this is another example where the policy track and the technology track side by side from each other. You're one of the unique organizations in the world that's focused on both of them, and you're creating bridges between the policy wonks and the tech geeks. Is there anything you can say about the cultural gap between public sector elected and appointed officials and technology-focused entrepreneurs or engineers? Can you say anything about whether or not those two worlds have an easy time interacting with each other, or maybe a difficult time?
So I feel like I have a lot of experience with this because I come from a policy background, and now I sit within one of the most innovative buildings on the UC Berkeley campus. And surrounding me at UC Berkeley are really bright individuals that are always charging forward, developing new technology, pushing the boundaries, exploring the new frontier. And I think if I look at my policy colleagues, it's more, oh no, what's happening? What are the concerns for people? We need to stop this. We need to take a step back, slow this thing down. So I think that the pace of the work is quite different between the two camps. Not to say that there aren't policy individuals, policy makers. There are many leaders in policy who are tech advocates, but there are also individuals within that camp who are a little bit more afraid and resistant and want to slow things down. So I think actually our paths are at different paces right now in how we view the development of technology. So I think communication, again, early and at forums, if anybody has a panel on tech issues, I think they should have a panelist who's going to provide the policy perspective, and that policy person then can hear the perspective of the technologist, and vice versa. So communicate early, frequently.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and would add that I think Citrus and some of the other UC Institutes for Science and Innovation are a good example of this kind of interdisciplinary approach that we think is so useful. And hopefully if we can inculcate that worldview in the students when they're here, that they'll go on to careers where even if they're going into industry in a, say, software development position or some kind of engineering position, that they will have at least considered some of the policy implications or the broader cultural or community implications of the decisions that they're making, and vice versa. If we try to bring together these interdisciplinary teams, that we might have students who are interested in policy or design or anthropology or other areas that are represented so well here on the UC Berkeley campus, but will have a better perspective on, say, data science or on the software engineering side or other IT concerns that will make them more responsible, more effective, just more knowledgeable citizens. Sorry, Gordon, I don't think we're hearing you at the moment.
Yeah. No.
Uh-oh.
I think Gordon will join in again in a minute.
Apologies to you all for that minor technical interruption. How is this better?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, you're back
Okay.
on.
Well, we're signing off now. Thank you both for participating. We're going to post this video as it gets played out on YouTube for many decades. Your children and your grandchildren will all be able to access this in perpetuity and listen to your predictions about the future. So thanks for participating.
Thank you.
See you soon.